Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Welcome back to the Cloudcast. I'm your host, Brian Gracely, along with Aaron. Aaron Delp, how you been, man? It's been a few weeks since we've been together.
Yeah, it's been a couple of weeks since we've recorded a show together, so it's definitely good to see you.
Yeah, no, good to see you. I know you've been traveling. We've both been traveling a little bit, but today we're going to dive into something that is a little bit behind the scenes of obviously what we've been talking about a lot, which is AI, but kind of right in your and I wheelhouse, which is how does this stuff get built? How does the infrastructure work? And most importantly, especially around AI these days, is it's such a big undertaking. It's such a big endeavor from a cost perspective, from a planning perspective. How are people building data centers? How are they, planning for this? What should they do themselves? What shouldn't they do? So really excited today to have Scott Jarnigan, who is founder and CEO of Caddis Cloud Solutions, joining us from Texas. Scott, welcome to the show. Great to have you on.
Thank you so much. Excited to be here.
Yeah. You have a very deep background in the data center space, in the infrastructure space. So before we dive into Caddis and the AI stuff, give folks a little bit of detail on your background, and then we'll jump in a little more.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. I started my career in I would say IT and IT infrastructure almost 30 years ago, and it was into sales. So I did distribution sales, manufacturing sales, contractor sales, and about 10 years, 15 years into it, I transitioned to project management, doing various things in IT infrastructure and construction, really focused on that from a contractor standpoint. That led me to a role at Microsoft. And during these times and transitions, I focused on every type of IT infrastructure project that you can do, whether it's data centers, colo space, NOCs, call centers, high-rise, you name it, and healthcare. It just doesn't matter. We did it all. But it led me to a role at Microsoft in which I led the retail brick and mortar space globally. So I led that team globally for 5 or 6 years. After that, I was recruited over to Oracle. Oracle's asked to build their data center fit-out team, right? The project management, the PMO group for the data center fit-out specifically. So once the site selection team at that time found a site, they'd hand everything over to us, and we'd negotiate the capital expense from a construction standpoint and work with the colo partners to deploy those sites wherever they were around the world. And we went from 4 sites around the world to 4 regions to about 44 regions in the market. Wow. About 2.5 years into that, so it was a lot of work fast. About 2 years into that, I was asked to take on, or given the opportunity, I would say, to take on the site selection team globally. And it was a small team. We transitioned really quickly and grew the space fairly fast. But it was a fantastic opportunity for me to take on something I honestly hadn't had a lot of experience in. I've done the construction work with the site selection team globally, and then taking on what it meant to secure the sites, the spaces, and negotiate the commercial contracts. And not only that, what it took to actually select a site and the important aspects of selecting site, what really we had to look for to mitigate risk and costs. Several years into that, I decided to step out on my own and develop and start a consulting group. And one of the primary reasons that, as I was looking at from a global scale, and you can see where the market was going, how fast it was growing, there are many operators, data center operators around the world, not specifically in the U.S., but in APAC and EMEA and Latin America, that were challenged in a manner of how to integrate themselves into the U.S. market, how to work with the U.S. market, and what the hyperscalers look for. A hyperscaler like Oracle Cloud, as an example, and some of the other larger groups. Maybe I'm not sure I can mention them. So when I first stepped out to develop my consulting group, it was really to focus on the colo space, helping those colo partners from a technical aspect, site selection, go-to-market plan, and their commercial negotiations, how to integrate that, and then work with building a cadence with some of the hyperscalers so they could understand how to go to business. And from there, the business has grown and transitioned to more construction management, more site development, and still maintaining the aspect of colo, but doing something even deeper, and we can get into that a little bit later. So,
yeah. No, that's fantastic. That's great background. We've actually spoken with a number of the Oracle Cloud folks over the years, Leo Leung and others. So we've seen the technology side of it. It's good to start to hear about the underlying pieces of it, the foundational stuff.
It was quite the experience, just in terms of how fast they scaled, and where there's so many issues. I would say not so many issues, so many people from the Oracle standpoint, outside of Oracle, really didn't think Oracle would succeed because they were behind, so to speak.
Yep.
The other cloud players. Just the intensity in which we grew and the focus, and there was a lot of chaos, but there was a lot of great times. Great team.
Fantastic. So, Scott,
go ahead.
Go ahead, Brian.
I was going to jump in. I know Aaron's a little bit under the weather, so I wanted to block him from getting a cough there on us. So let's look a little bit. Obviously, we've all been hearing about, I think the proxy that everybody sort of thinks about when they think about infrastructure with AI is, the quarterly number that comes out from NVIDIA, right? How much have they sold? And so people start to, backtrack into, okay, well, if they sold a lot, there must be a lot of GPUs going in, hence data centers are going in. But give us a sense, like, you've been around sort of all of data center, like you said, colo, self-owned, the hyperscalers. If somebody's trying to understand what AI is doing to the data center market, like, is it a small percentage? Is it a huge percentage? Is it completely, revamping what's going on? Kind of give us a broader picture of what this new AI phenomenon is doing to the overall data center market.
I'd say I think it's had a fairly dramatic change just in a very short period, with NVIDIA increasing their chipsets and the capacity for the chips and what that has done from a individual per rack power draw. But just in my opinion, it's been a tremendous impact short period over the past year and a half, and I think we're going to continually see that increase by new chipsets that are being released here shortly. We've seen everything from when I first started, in the cloud space, looking at 8, 10, 15 kilowatt racks, which was a tremendous, like a 15 kilowatt rack is like, holy cow, how are we going to achieve this? To now, looking at 120, 140 kilowatt racks to try to plan for something of that nature.
Wow.
It's fairly substantial. So from a total scale and impact, there's a tremendous drive to secure capacity, to secure land, to work with the utilities, and the demand is increased to the fact that it's hard to keep up, right?
Yeah.
So it's just incredibly hard to keep on. You see it a lot in the U.S. and you see it hitting other areas of the world, but primarily here in the U.S. it's been fairly substantial.
Yeah. And Scott, kind of a follow-up to the power question, because in my background, back in those days of like the 8 to 10, maybe even a 12 or 15 kilowatt rack, like you could get power to it. Maybe it was hard, but then also you had to cool the sucker too. Tell everyone a little bit about like the environmental aspects of all of this, right? Like, because obviously, you can get power into it. I mean, if you can get the feeds from the company and all the other things that are going on, but then how does it change the design of the data center as well? Because just because it's in a rack doesn't mean it can necessarily run, right?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, correct. So it changes things quite a bit. So if you look at the way that if you're building something an 8 kilowatt rack or 10 kilowatt rack versus a 40, 50, 80, 100 kilowatt rack in terms of the infrastructure needed just to support that rack, and the impacts to the structural environment, whether it's the floor overhead ratings, the impacts to the mechanical corridors, the impacts to the space itself. Obviously there's going to be an aspect of you're still going to need air there. Air is going to be pushed, but there's going to be a lot of other plumbing, so to speak, that's required for if you're looking at chilled water to the chips. If a chipset, if you're going to look at rear door heat exchange, if you're going to look at in-row cooling, there's the implementation of AI and especially the increase of per rack draw is made the space even more dynamic. From your first designs from a power distribution standpoint, what are you doing from a power design standpoint on site? How are you going to achieve this, and how are you going to make sure this asset that you're going to spend potentially billions of dollars on over time, how are you going to make sure that's the most valuable and viable asset over time? And then looking at, I'll say, the interior of the space and making sure that you're able to achieve the workloads and maintain power and what you're trying to do for a number of years, because the draw per rack is changing so quickly. If you're at a 40 kilowatt rack today, how do you plan for a 140 kilowatt rack tomorrow? If it's going to hit your space, that's something that's being challenged every day. So it's a combination of things where you're going to have a combination air, you're going to have a combination. I was just talking to a team today. They're going to have a combination air, they're going to have some chilled water to the chip, and they're going to have some rear door heat exchange applications, because that application can chill, rack capacities up to 200-300 kilowatts per rack with immersion, right?
Yeah. One of the things, and you probably went through this somewhat in previous lives, right? When we go through these technology transitions, so like, for example, with cloud, there was a term that was used a lot called, bimodal IT or bimodal cloud, which sort of meant you've got a lot of legacy stuff that you've got to maintain. And then there's this new stuff that's come along. And, it's so different than what had come before. You almost have to carve it off separately, think about it differently, architect it differently. Are you seeing a similar thing in data center designs? Because obviously, yes, AI is hot, and it's like, as you've mentioned, it's blowing up kind of all of the previous kind of world, whether it's ping, power, pipe, size, and all sorts. But like, how are, whether it's a cloud provider, a colo provider, even an big enterprise company like a bank, like how are they thinking about this world that is now 10x as big? Like, are they putting these things side by side? Is it the new stuff is a completely different site? Like, how are they dealing with just the fact that they can't get rid of the old stuff, or they still have to maintain the old stuff, but this new stuff is so radically different? What kind of thinking are they going through with that?
We'll just start with the basics of your building alone. Typically, a lot of these other older facilities that might have been the older colo spaces that were accommodate, they just don't have the capabilities. If you're going to have a large AI presence to accommodate the rack weight, the point loads, just from the floor rating perspective alone.
Sure.
Then you'll have all the additional overhead structure that you have to contend with. Well, what's your overhead structure and how much additional weight is there, just from a structural standpoint? And then if you to accommodate the chilled water, do you have the mechanical plant or do you have the space to increase your power to support the mechanical and the additional piping and infrastructure? So just from a physical aspect, there's a tremendous amount that has to be done if you have an existing building, just to ensure that you can accommodate those workloads. And if not, what do you do from there? How do you find the sites and capabilities to support something of that nature? So there's a tremendous shift in terms of how you plan. If you're looking to do it and like deploy AI in a just-in-time model, so to speak, saying, okay, I need to deploy AI today, I'm going to find a site tomorrow with capacity. That's just not there. It might have been 2 or 3 years ago, but today it's a plan that you have to really, really sit down and think about what you're trying to do over time, and to deploy something so you have the right site that's going to accommodate future workloads.
Sure. And Scott, let me ask you this then, kind of a follow-on to that. When people are trying to do planning and thinking ahead, and there's, enterprise or customers out there, if we are kind of go down this bimodal path, if you will, of the old and the new, and we have to build the new, and the new is maybe space constrained or, in some way constrained, how many folks are deciding to actually dedicate the time to build out new data centers and new facilities, like true greenfield, if you will? Or how many of them are just simply going to a really good colo, or some other kind of facility that specializes in this? Like, how much are, folks you're talking to building versus just going and outsourcing it?
It's a great combination of things, because not everyone can go out and find their own site. Not everyone has the maturity in their processes or the team to find a site, to secure a site, to build, to invest in a site and then build it. That's a totally different skill set than a lot of some people have, and some companies do not. But then you do see the companies that do have that skill set, but also because they're moving and growing so fast, they'll have to utilize the colo aspects too. Look for great partners that are doing something unique in the market, and developing these sites in the market that they'll have a combination of. They're building their own greenfield or brownfield sites, or they're doing a combination of colo to meet their growing demand. But I think it's a two-part thing where not everyone has the capabilities to deploy their own sites. It's just a totally different skill set in itself. From an enterprise standpoint, I'd say from you have groups like the hyperscalers that are really mature in their processes, majority of them, so it looks, right? And they have their teams that build and deploy from self-serve, so to speak, and then they have a team that goes and sources colo space. Then you'll have the enterprise standpoint that I would say a lot of the enterprise groups, before they even start to take down any kind of capacity whatsoever, they really need to understand what they're trying to do today and what they need to do tomorrow. Versus the just-in-time models we talked about a little bit before, because a just-in-time model to secure capacity is great for the today, but capacity is moving so fast. If you have anything available today, any kind of decent power, and the site's decent, it goes away so fast. As an example, I was talking to a customer late last week about some potential capacity. Talked to the supplier. We're working with them on securing a colo space, but now the whole campus is going to be consumed by one customer. And so we either act incredibly fast to help your enterprise client making sure they understand what the marketplace looks like today, making them understand and believe it. That's another case, so they can move fast enough to scale. Because if not, they're challenged in terms of meeting their overall growth requirements.
Yeah, I'm curious if you were, obviously it's a very different conversation if you were talking to a colo provider or like your former employer, that on the sort of providing supply side for this stuff. If you were advising an enterprise, and obviously the answers could vary quite a bit, but if you were advising somebody, like what's the sort of framework that you would typically go through with them in terms of, how mature are you in terms of, do you really need to own your own capacity? What level of maturity would they typically have to sort of say, okay, now it's time to sort of invest in this because it's going to be part of our, our long-term, infrastructure requirements and application requirements. Like, how would you go about doing that? Like you said, given, how volatile things are, how fast things are moving, the level of investment you'd have to make. What would you typically do if somebody, kind of phoned you up and said, hey, I'm so-and-so with decent size enterprise, like walk me through this. Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, it depends on, because they're not just going to be pushing just AI workloads, they're going to be pushing all their other applications too for workloads too. So really, and they have to determine what they're going to keep on-prem in their site today and what they need to move off-prem. Because sometimes it just doesn't it's not economically feasible for them to have and host unless you're a large enterprise and you have billions of dollars, for them to host and manage their own site and facilities, for overall scale. You got to trust in some of these colo partners that their job is to build and deploy capacity globally, and the efficiencies in which they implement around the world could truly benefit a lot of these a lot of the enterprise partners. So first things first is understanding what you're really trying to attain, right? Where your workloads are going to sit, on-prem versus on-prem versus off-prem. And then really develop your AI plans. What are you trying to do today, and what do you need to do tomorrow? If you have an application that you say you're going to need 5 megawatts today, what's going to be that increase over time? Is it going to be 5 megawatts every quarter, 5 megawatts every year, 5 megawatts every 2 years, whatever that is? And try to establish what that is. So you can go to a colo partner, if you're not going to host it yourself, and saying, okay, colo partner, I need to have this amount of capacity today. Well, let's say it's 10 megawatts, and I need to be able to scale 10 megawatts over 2 or 3 years. And making sure when you go to contract that or negotiate that, that's part of your discussions. So you secure that capacity. I know there's a lot of pushback on that because there's an implication of a lot of cash and capital. And some of these AI groups, enterprise groups, don't want to expend all that capital. But if you do it, negotiate it correctly, and you're helping your partner, your customer, that it can be economically feasible if you do it right, where you take your day one capacity and then you start ramping over time, you pay for what you ramp into. And then second to that is that the enterprise teams, it would be to their benefit to really understand what the market's doing, how fast it's moving. And then really, if you're working with the colo and not working with someone like myself, there's a lot of other great brokers and a lot of great consultants out there. If you're going to take it on your own dime and you have a team, they should step back and slow down the process a little bit so you can start asking those colo partners, those developers, very, very hard questions. Yeah. Those hard questions to push them to give you the data that you require from their power plans and commitments from the utilities for delivery, their construction plans, their procurement plans, their operational plans, and then start taking commercial negotiations too, to really understand what the overall cost to be from today and what the escalators are going to be over time from a commercial standpoint. So there's a lot of hard questions. And then also get on site and do your actual own site due diligence. It's well worth the flight to go somewhere, to take a look at that site physically, to make sure that, one, the building's really there. Two, you can see the aspects of the building to make sure it's going to meet your security requirements and the various aspects of operational data center usage. So there's some really hard questions that I think the enterprises should ask. And obviously, if they can't or they don't have the skill set, we're always here to help out. But they need to slow down that process a little bit, because this investment that they're doing over time and the critical nature of that investment, it would behoove them to do that. It's in their benefit.
Yeah. Hey, Scott, follow-up question that while you were talking about all that, made me think also about, sometimes like government regulations or government involvement, can be an issue in some of these things here in the States or globally. What are some aspects of that people should be thinking about as well?
Yeah, interesting. I think everyone in the DC market that has anything to do with construction is acutely aware, even the government, which is odd, right? Acutely aware of the issues with our grid and the challenges that to meet the demand, just from a data center standpoint. And of course, that doesn't include all the other aspects of what the grid has to meet in terms of power and growth. But from the government standpoint, we've seen some legislation that was recently passed, and I actually got an article today from a partner of mine, IP3 International, and I'll talk about what that partnership is later if we have time. But they sent to me this act of the Advanced Act 2024, which was basically an act that the president signed off on, and there's an agreement all across the board that helps streamline the processes of licensing and increases regulatory efficiencies for getting SMRs, kind of almost privatizing SMRs, small modular reactors. For power and deployment on sites. And I think that's a big thing, right? Because anytime you get into the nuclear space, there's the whole NIMBY issue, which is not my backyard issue. If anyone has ever watched a movie, if there's ever any kind of issue with nuclear, there's this massive issue with nuclear. And the SMRs, that the way they're built, they're so much safer, right? And they take a much less space on sites. And so from a power deployment, you've seen this legislation being passed, and the approval is to decrease, I'm not saying decrease regulatory requirements, but increase efficiency so these things get approved even faster for deployment, because it's critical. IP3 International and a few other companies like that are really leading the way for SMR, almost privatizing SMR installations, modular reactor installations on sites. And to me, that's incredibly exciting, because if you look at the dynamics of power, getting your base load from utilities, and wherever the utilities are getting it from could be a combination of the typical coal, could be gas for cogen, could be air, wind, and hydro, and then you add an aspect of the SMR, which if you have a site 500, 600, 700, 800 acres, you could drop something on your site that could increase the total capacity up to 1 gigawatt for your site, if not more, based on what kind of reactor that you do have. So that's incredibly exciting that the government recognizes that, and they're helping achieve something faster, which is, I think, going to be a benefit for all.
Yeah, I was actually, I had been thinking about that as we were having this conversation the whole time. I was, nuclear is this incredibly efficient energy source, but yet it has, certain negative stereotypes. And I was curious if that was, because we saw a thing, I don't know, I feel like it's been 6-7 months or so ago, but like there was an article that Microsoft was already sort of putting out feelers to put nuclear reactors near their data centers. And it a lot of us were like, holy cow, it doesn't seem like what we were used to with data centers, but it does almost seem like, well, that's the most logical and efficient way of doing it. I'd be very curious, outside of like Homer Simpson and so forth, what the world's capacity for nuclear operators looks like. If that's, does that become the next sort of bottleneck if they could get past the stigma of the technology?
Yeah, and of course, it's not going to take as much land that you see in the typical nuclear reactor sites. It's just not going to take as much land. Like I said, we're working on a potential opportunity with a landowner with IP3 International. I keep mentioning because they're such a fantastic group, for taking out 100 acres to develop to drop an SMR on the site that would generate 1 gigawatt of power. Right. Yeah. So there's more work that has to do, but they do all the diligence and regulation, going through everything they have to do to achieve approvals for the SMR. But I think you see more and more reports of nuclear being adopted, for development. And then you do get into the issues of getting to certain areas and environments that aren't used to nuclear, and they're scared of it. It makes a lot of sense, because anything that you see in the news, or it always has to do some catastrophic failure. If you watch the movies, it's a global meltdown based on one reactor. It's all sorts of issues, but it's such a different application, and they're incredibly safe. And they're now, with the government approving the ability to move faster, also shows that there's a lot more openness to developing solutions of this nature.
Yeah. I want to ask you one last question. I know we've gone all over the map with you. We've asked you a million things, and it's been super helpful. So thank you so much. I want to dive a little bit into Caddis and the frameworks that you engage with. I know we've asked you a few questions about, how do you engage with enterprise, and but do you guys have sort of a typical framework that you would work with customers to help them, work through those, or is this such a fast moving market that every situation is very different and unique. And how would you guys typically engage the big opportunities, fast moving opportunities? Is it still very unique, or is it starting to become somewhat more consistent, just needs expertise?
Well, there's a consistency in the deliverables and what's happening, right? I would say that, but everyone has a unique aspect of what you're trying to attain, whether it's they're looking for colo space, whether they're looking for a megawatt versus 10 megawatts. That approach, you still have to go through various aspects from the data center selection standpoint if you're looking at colo, right? So there's definitely a template in which I would apply, saying if you came to me and said, hey, I need a megawatt today versus or 50 megawatts today. Well, you got to ask a few harder questions to the provider, but the way you go about assessing the site, assessing the structure, assessing the equipment, everything else on site, there's a typical process that you should go. And what a hyperscaler asks for versus what an enterprise group asks for versus what someone else, there's a couple extra questions that the hyperscalers, they dig into a little bit harder. So all of our customers that we do various aspects of working with colo partners. We track capacity globally. We probably track about 70 or 80 partners around the world. So if a customer said, hey, Scott, what is going on in Timbuktu? I can say, well, here's what I know about what's going on in that area of the world. We have, five sites, 3 megawatts capacity today, tomorrow, Q1, Q2, Q3. We also have an aspect where we work with developers and capital partners, which we have secured through our joint venture, almost 4,000 acres just in the U.S. for development. And we're doing diligence on the site. We're breaking down the parcel, doing master planning so we can understand it and start taking sites to market. Now, when we start doing that, we will work with customers, larger hyperscalers or larger colo partners, developers, to take those sites to market, saying, "Hey, we have this asset, we've done this diligence. Would you be interested in doing X, Y, Z?" Right. So, from a development standpoint, and that's a timely and costly to get that done, but we're doing a lot of the work. And then we have other aspects in which we work with partners to deploy technologies, to do power planning, to do SMR planning, to do bring gas cogen. So we take an approach from a master planning standpoint, with depending on what the client looks like, to really saying, okay, what are you really trying to attain? And let's start walking through what the process is. If it's colo space and you're trying to get a colo, well, you need a megawatt today, you need 50 megawatts tomorrow. That's a process in which we have to plan to make sure contractually it's structured properly, so it makes economic sense for you. And then from a development standpoint, the customers in which we're taking a 100 megawatt site versus a gigawatt site are a little bit different, right? So there's not just everyone can take down a gigawatt site. So very, very specific customers which you're marketing things to. And then we'll work with enterprise groups too, from smaller scale type items, from 500 kilowatts to a megawatt, 2 megawatts. So we have various verticals we do work on. That we provide our customer solutions on, and it goes from development to power generation, power planning, to planning for critical electromechanical equipment, and then getting further into the details of cooling sites and spaces, utilizing some of our partnerships, all the way to utilizing a group called Lone Star for disaster recovery, Lone Star Lunar, which this would be a whole nother show if you ever want to talk about what it means. If you ever looked up Lone Star Lunar, I could send you a link on what it means to provide disaster recovery solutions that are literally off planet.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
We may have to dig into that someday, Aaron. You're fascinated with Mars, so we really
exactly.
Well, it's actually real. When I first heard of it, I just didn't believe it. I've talked to the company, the CEO, their workloads and their payloads that are going up are sold out, and it's a really fascinating solution.
Interesting stuff. Scott, you have given us more in 30 minutes than I think Aaron and I could have read in weeks and weeks. Thank you so much for helping us really kind of understand this space a little bit. And obviously, like you mentioned, we've kind of just scratched the surface, but thank you so much for the time today. Aaron, any last thoughts? This was, we dug into a lot of stuff.
Yeah, no, we dug into a lot of stuff, and then we even left with, hey, we got stuff for a whole other show.
That's right. Well, listen,
there's a lot out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And folks, we've got, all the links to the things we talked about are in the show notes, links to Caddis if you want to engage with Scott's team. Obviously, lots and lots of, real hands-on experience at very, very good scale, both in the States and around the world. So, Scott, with that, we want to thank you for the time, folks. Appreciate you all listening every week. Thanks for telling a friend. Thanks for, asking questions. Thanks for, sharing all we do on social media. And so with that, on behalf of Aaron and myself, I want to thank Scott for the time today. And with that, we'll wrap up and we'll talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.